Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Welcome to Šiauliai University to the 8th International Scientific Conference, Region, History, Culture and Language. Welcome, dear colleagues, to this scientific event, which is very important for our Šiauliai University community, as well as for scientific community in all around Europe. Today we have some presentations. We hope for very productive scientific discussions. And to welcome you, I would like to invite the Acting Vice Rector for Research and Art, Professor Diana Cibulskienė.
Good morning, dear participants of the conference. It's my pleasure to welcome you at Šiauliai University in this conference, which is eighth time in our university. And this conference includes three areas: history, language, and culture. And it shows that it's very important to discuss about this all issues. They are very important for all countries and for all participants. So I would like to wish you very interesting discussions, interesting time to be together to discuss, and as well nice days in our city.
Thank you for Vice Rector. And now the welcome speech will be given by the Acting Director of Institute of Regional Development, Associated Professor Lina Garšvienė.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm happy that today you are our Šiauliai University guest. And well, let me welcome you at this annual international interdisciplinary conference, which unites, well, a lot of scientists, guests from various Lithuanian cities and also foreign countries, yeah, such as Latvia, Croatia, Russia, Belarus, and Pakistan. Yeah, so let me welcome you. Well, I am the director of Regional Development Institute. So these problems of regional development are really important, should be important for me. Yeah, so, well, I'm not telling that I interpret region just like, let's say, Šiauliai city. I hope that we could interpret it even like a country, union of countries. Yeah, so also let me say that I think that culture, language, yeah, and history, you are the scientists responsible for the uniqueness of what? Of us, of the countries. So you are really how to say, important part among the scientists. So have a good discussions, have a good time, and see you.
Thank you, dear Director. And now I would like to ask to give a welcome speech, a short welcome speech for our colleague, well known for everybody in this room, the head of organizing committee, Associated Professor Regina Kvašytė.
Hello, everybody. On behalf of the scientific committee and the organizers, I would like to congratulate all participants of the 8th conference. We started preparing this regional research conferences in 2012. Back then, we had no idea that it would fit our current structure. Let me remind that the first theme of the first conference was region, time, space, people. Nearly 100 humanitarian, social, and exact science academics from 5 countries arrived at this conference. Later, in the year 2014, this format has become a reality because the initiators of the conference were from the humanities. It was dedicated to focus on his science area. And therefore choose we organized first conferences as a research center of northern Lithuania. Then we are where the department of the humanities faculty. Later, the center became part of the research institute, the humanitarian research center. Therefore, those of you who are participating in the conference region history, culture and language, not the first time have experienced these changes. But we cherish traditions. We are happy to have permanent participants. We are also pleased to discover new and young scientists. Researchers from the region represent various Lithuanian and in this year 5 foreign universities and research centers. I wish everyone good feeling in this conference, good work and pleasant communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina, for your welcome speech, as well for your big efforts to help to all our participants to organize the scientific event in Šiauliai University. We would like to remind that this plenary session will be transmitted online via Researchers Excellence Network. It's uniting more than 40 institutions all around the world, including more than 25 countries. So this network is a nice possibility to be involved in such scientific events, to give the feedback, to give some questions for our speakers, and to unite the scientific community in not only the Europe, not only in our region, but in all the world. So we would like to, if you will we would like to begin our plenary session. And all questions and discussions are very welcomed at the very end of all presentations. So now we would like to invite Aija Jansone from Latvia to begin with your nice presentation. So your time. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Aija Jansone, Doctor of History. I represent the University of Latvia Institute of History, and at the same time, I also represent the Latvian Ethnographic Open Air Museum, in which I work 2 years. And all my scientific life from the 19 1983, when I started to work at the institute, my scientific subject was the history of textiles, history of embroideries, and history of of that. And therefore, today, my report also connected with the same subject, only a little bit in a different scope. So, the role of Latvian Catholic Church textiles in perfecting people's aesthetic values. The development of folk art for many centuries has been influenced by European and Eastern cultures that reach the territory of Latvia through cities, manors, and church. In recent years, there has been an in-depth interest in the history of liturgical textiles in the 18th and 20th century. In Europe, researchers work on a variety of scientific topics. For example, history of liturgical fabrics and objects, their origin, import directions of trade routes, variety of materials, decoration technique, history of European textile manufactories, origin and rule of gifts given to the church, craftsmen works for the church, the influence of liturgical textiles on the peasant attire. I focused on the research of church textiles only in 2012. In principle, I am at the beginning of the research work on this topic. I am currently trying to identify all the stored church textiles as well as written sources. For the first time in the cultural history of Latvia, I have started to identify these textiles in Catholic churches of Latgales culture and historical area. In ethnographic expeditions, I have gathered materials in the most visible Catholic churches of Aglona, Baltina, Vabalvi, Preili, Riebiņi, Vārkava, Vilika municipalities. Usually, one expedition will take a week, and at its time, there are approximately 400 to 500 items are identified. In this year, I plan to collect materials in Balvi under the National Research Program Ethnological. In Latgale Catholic churches, the degree of preservation of church textiles is comparing good. They are carefully stored in boxes and wardrobes. Yeah. The problem is only to date objects because there is no record of their creator, place, and time. For purpose of determining the origin of objects, it is appropriate to investigate the years of church construction and a comparison with the European liturgical textile fabric of that time, raw materials, finishing materials, tapes and laces, weaving technology and design, the history of parish, city or manor in the territory of which the church is situated, the time of arrival of new raw materials, silk, velvet, cotton, and geography, distribution of art materials, threads, tapes, pearls, and special literature, artwork albums, embroidery in cross stitches or other fine needlework on 18th and 19th centuries, white works embroidery, crochet, networks, works to come to fashion in Europe in the mid of 19th century. Also is significant is the synthesizing the chemical dyes in Europe in 1856, which developed fiber dyeing skills and influenced the adornment of liturgical textiles. Berlin wool works embroidery, second half of the 19th century, and broderie and Richelieu embroidery technique in the turn of the 20th century. By functionality, Catholic textiles fabrics can be classified in the clothing of priests and interior textiles of the church, altar blankets, flags, baldachins, etc. Normally, cope, chasuble, stole, manipula, and chalice whale, Bitter Williams in Latvian, and Burs was made in a set of one fabric and decorated in the same style as the finishing materials available, brocade and metal thread lace, etc. Often only parts of the set have remained until now. They are usually the smallest components of the set, the stalls, manipulas, and chalice whale and horses. We must be grateful for the same thing because it allows us to imagine and overlook all of the liturgical clothing, material, and ornament and make reference to the time of its existence. The material collected in churches is very diverse. It shows many layers of culture, different materials, techniques, and ornaments. Today, I want to introduce you with my observation in the cut and ornamentation of alb and surplice. With many years of prestige on traditional folk costume in the territory of Latvia, my special attention in Catholic churches was attached to the clothing of priests, such as alb and surplice, pulled over soothen by a priest. It should be noted that alb is long white linen tunic with long and is usually gilded with cincture, the type of belt. The surplice is a large sleeve tunic. Yeah. Okay. The surplice is a large sleeve tunic of half length made of fine linen or cotton and worn by all clergy. Please on the right side. To my surprise, the cut of alb is identical to the cut of peasant shirt. As we know, the design of Latvian peasant shirts was very simple: long sleeves with straight ends, a straight collar, and shoulder straps, under arm wedges. All details were cut along the lines of the thread. The only difference is that alb are very large and long because they were pulled on the priest's shoulder. Its length ranged from 150 till 190 centimeters, a width of the width of 220 till approximately 300 centimeters. Phenomenally, that straight thread cut and traditional cross-cutting technology at the cut of alb and surplice was survived until now. For peasants, this cut of shirt disappeared in the turn of the 20th century. Like shirt, alb, and surplice were sewn from white linen, but with second hand of the 19th century also of cotton fabric. In the past, peasant shirts and albs were stitched with hands, but with the second half of the 19th century with sewing machine. Albs and surplices had not been adorned in the past, but with the 17th century, its bottom and sleeves were also decorated with the lace and embroidery, the width of which varied from 10 till 55 centimeters. Like peasant shirts, two shoulder structures have been identified for alb. the first alb-like tunic shirt with shoulder straps outside, and the second alb with shoulder straps sewn on. This is the second. Few words about alb and surplice adornment. In the 18th and 20th centuries, alb and surplice decorations are very temporal. It accumulates all the artwork techniques of a given time. In Latgale, alb and surplice are adorned with many techniques, and now I say which they are. At first, the embroidery in white working technique, which comes in fashion in the middle of the 19th century under the influence of Biedermeier art style. Also peasant shirts embroidered only in white thread during the time. The embroidery in tulle in the middle of the 19th century, the same piece of work appears in the ornament of peasant caps and shirts. Network works are becoming popular in the turn of the 20th century with the 1880 crochet laces is in fashion, which is used in the adornment of peasant shirts, aprons, and room textiles, towels, tablecloths. With the beginning of the 20th century, fashion comes white works such Richelieu and broderie embroidery, with which the ordinary people willingly embroider themselves as clothing and room textiles. When entering into used for sewing machines like Singer, Imperial, Grower, etc., decorative stitches are richly sewn with them. We see great diversity in alb and surplice decorations. The most common ornaments are geometrical ornaments as determined by performance technique. The second, the floral motifs, roses, lilies. And the third, there are also topics of church, Christmas monograms, crosses, grapes, and wine. The variety of designs of adorning patterns is likely to be determined by the tastes of performers and by the available artwork information. Parts of the churches were requested by special workshops, but in the rural areas, local professionals were actively involved in the production of liturgical textiles. Commonly, the local masters made and decorated the most understandable objects of the people, such as alps, surplice, and altar blankets. In Catholic churches, the congregation listened not only priest sermons, organs, and chants, but also watched the architecture of the church and the liturgical textiles that were beautiful and admired. Although there is a will that the Catholic Church is conservative, we see many Europe's latest technological and artistic achievements in the making and adorning of liturgical textiles. In particular, they are less known raw materials, silk, cotton, the world achievements in the making of fabrics, brocade, damask, silk, jacquard, etc., European modern needlework, white embroidery, covering embroidery, embroidered with color wool yarn, crochet laces, network embroidery, Richelieu embroidery technique, and adorning composition, geometrical and floral patterns, which is scattered in the territory of Latvia through ornament books and the development of the network of artisan shop. Of course, color set also was very important after the 1850. As a result, there is mutual influence. We see mutual influence in church and present textiles. At first, the church used local materials in the making of liturgical textiles. Fine linen fabric were in great respect, and traditional shirt cuts that have been recognized for many generations. But the peasants, through the church, became aware of new raw materials, craft materials, artwork machinery, and composition. The decorated church textiles encourage the peasants to learn new crafts to make their clothing and interior designs more beautiful and timely. New knowledge improved the cultural level of the nation, raised awareness of the beautiful and timeless, and provide insight into art trends in Europe. At the same time, the pursuit of the world new led to a reduction in the specificity of traditional lifestyle.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Is there any hot question for the presenter at this moment? No, still audience will think about it and will give after all presentations. So now it's my great, yes, certificate. Congratulations. Thank you very much. And now we would like to invite our dear colleagues from Croatia. We have two colleagues here, Mr. Vladimir Legac and Krunoslav Mikulan. They will give the presentation of three co-authors. So it's great pleasure to see you here. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning. Sorry, can everybody hear me? Okay, probably everybody who's watching us via Regional Excellence Network. As you heard, this is a joint presentation. This is it. Thank you. So, as you have heard from Vita, this is a joint presentation. So, there are three authors to this paper. Draženko Tomić is the first author. I'm the second. My name is Vladimir Reda, and Krunoslav Mikulan, third author. So, the title of our paper is Ethnological, Teleological, and Axiological Components of the Traditional Upbringing in the Early 20th Century in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As all of you know, Bosnia and Herzegovina is a country in southeastern Europe on the Balkan Peninsula. The current population of Bosnia and Herzegovina is 3.5 million. In fact, we are not quite sure about the current the exact number. The last census was in 2011, and since then, many people with Bosnian citizenship have left. Okay, so many Croats and many Muslims and many Serbs have started to work in the Republic of Ireland, Germany, etc. There are three national components in that country, but today we'll be talking only about the two. In fact, we'll be talking about the time of the beginning of the 20th century and the census that was held approximately at that time was in 1910. The population then was 1.9 million. There were about 32%, so 1/3 of the population were Muslim, and 1/4, a little bit less than 1/4, were Catholics. Majority of Catholics belong to are Croats. Third component, Serbs, they are mainly Serb Orthodox, okay? Similar to Russian Orthodox Church. The time, to be exact, that we are talking about is the year of 1908. Because we used two books that served for this purpose to explain the way that children were brought up in that country at that time. In 1908, those two books were published. The first one, it was written by Nikola Vuconic. He was born in Legac, and he died in Sarajevo in 1947. And Anton Hangi was born in Croatia and died in Sarajevo. But both of them worked as teachers and teaching supervisors in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they had to travel all around the country to get information about education. That was time that Bosnia belonged to Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So in the year of 1867, that was time of the Berlin Congress. This country was annexed and belonged to Austria-Hungary until the end of the First World War. An important thing for the education was the education school reform in the year of 1861. The title of the first book is Life and Customs and Practices of Croats of Catholic Faith, and the second one was Life and Customs of Muslims. Now, as supervisors, they traveled all around the country. Now, this school reform stated that children should attend primary education. And the most important thing that the children were supposed to learn was based on tradition and respect for family. So number one, first place where children had to be educated was at home, and to learn how to respect adults. Then comes school and state, and the third was church. Sorry, it's not moving. So you can see the chapters of the first book about Catholic, and this is the second one. It's working. Thank you. Now, families, they were extremely large in those days. This is a picture of a Catholic Christian family with 12 children, but there were families with up to 15 children. Women gave birth to children as long as they were able to. So they could have, well, it was not a rare practice that they had even over 15. This is a picture taken at Bačaršija. That's the most famous site in Sarajevo where all these craftsmen worked. Now, in the eyes of people of both faiths, so Catholic and Muslim, children were seen as a treasure given by God, and they were happy to have as many as they could. They were looking forward to each new pregnancy. There was a big difference in how they reacted when they got pregnant. Women of Catholic faith tried to hide it, not to show it at the very beginning, and Muslim ladies bragged about as soon as they knew. Now, as I said, they liked children, but male children, so boys, were preferred, and this was even more the case with people of Muslim faith. So, and there were a lot of habits about it. So, and these were parts of folk superstitions. Okay, so there was popular belief what husband and wife were supposed to do, how to get male children. Okay, so you can see it here. Some quotations from the book about Catholics up there and down there about Muslims. So as you may have noticed, we mentioned the word fez. Fez was that cap. You can see, you'll be able to see it later. Okay, here, see. And it was worn both by people of Catholic faith as well as by those belonging to Islam. So when couples didn't have children during the first year of marriage, that was a bad sign, seen bad sign. So the women were supposed to pray a lot and to give a lot of money to the poor as alms. So, and there was a difference in these two books. The first one, so both of them were written by Catholics. The first one was written because the author was afraid that these traditions could disappear. But second book was written by a Croatian, a Catholic, so for the Catholics, so that they might learn a lot about Muslim faith. And it was meant primarily for those, as he put it, who live across the Sava River in the north and below mountain peaks of Troglav, Dinara, and Biokovo. So during that period, that was the period of industrialization. So it was the period of the emergence of the new class of craftsmen, okay, that now were not only craftsmen like those from Bačaršija, but people who worked family factories and people who owned them. But on the other side, it was, the whole country was agrarian, and there was a big difference between Catholic Muslims. Vast majority of Muslims lived in towns, and that's part of the history because they were on better terms with the authorities, the earlier state, of the Ottoman Empire. So robots were mainly serfs. Okay. Now, as I've mentioned, those superstitions, there were more beliefs of that kind on the Muslim side. During, as they wanted to have a lot of children, they, when the women were pregnant, they were allowed to eat whatever they wanted. Okay, so more money was spent on food, as you can see. So there was also many people think that they were supposed to be given something that tasted sour, and there were a lot of recipes about healthy food, what women were supposed to eat. And it was true of people belonging to both religions. So now, family was the key place where children were supposed to be properly raised. They had to learn about the duties, what they were supposed to do, so that one day they would be good members of society. So that everybody was sure that the future would be secure for them. At the time before pension funds and other things, so everybody wanted to make sure that everything would be fine when they would be old. And so descendants, to have descendants, that they would have secure, financially secure future. At home, they had to learn how to dress properly. Well, this book about Muslims, it gives all the names of the items of clothing and all these garments, even the prices, they were influenced by Islam. Okay, women used to wear wider things. Okay, even when they were not pregnant, although that was too often while they were young. Now, there were many rules how the children were supposed to behave at home. They were, when they were asked to come to the room, told something, they did it quietly, okay? They listened to what they were told, and then when they walked out of the room, they were not allowed to turn their backs towards parents. But it was not only parents who were in charge of education, and family was much broader. So you have a lot of expressions that are used to refer. In English, you have only uncle, okay, that's your father's brother, your mother's brother, etc. But in all these, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there are several expressions. Croatians, as Catholics, have more but people of Muslim faith have even more, because they even had larger families. Now, there were some other people also who belonged to the family, and with Catholics, these were godfathers and godmothers. So when children were baptized, then a child was held by a godmother and godfather. Um, in Islam, they don't have that, but they have circumcision, uh, godfathers and godmothers. Okay, so in Catholicism, that's the person who holds the child during baptism, and in Islam, the person who holds the scissors that are used for circumcision. They also have wedding witnesses. I'm talking now about people of Islam faith. And something that Catholics don't have, that's hair cutting godfathers. When the child was first, when the child's hair was cut, okay, then there was also a person who was supposed to do it, okay, to cut the hair pin. Again, that's not the whole of the story. You can see hair cutting here, but adults, we don't have any pictures of youngsters. There were family cooperatives. Okay? So these were very large units with over 60 people, and the head, the hosts of those cooperatives were also in charge of education, and children were supposed to listen to them, and they were seen as a very important authority. Then the school, there was again a big difference between schools. As I said, in 1861, that law was passed by the Austrian-Hungarian government. All children were supposed to go to school. Croatian children started attending school at the age of 8 or 9 in those days. So we can see that very late nowadays. Muslim children started very early going to made schools. Now, this is a loan word used, and there's a big difference between what you hear in Western Europe. You'll hear words from Arabic. For example, all of you are familiar with Muslim fasting. It's called Ramadan, but in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we call it Ramazan, because this is the Turkish word, or in fact, the nearest approximation in Croatian, okay, because that's what people tend to do when they can't pronounce them. Now, it was not there was no law obliging people to attend these religious schools, but it was seen as a duty by them. Okay, so I mentioned earlier giving money as alms to the poor. It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Now, this Croatian order, where he tries to help Croatian people of Catholic faith to learn about Islam, he gives detailed explanations of all the 5 pillars. So the prayer is different. People from Bosnia are Sunnite Muslims, so they pray 5 times a day. Explanations are given. So children and women don't need to go to the mosques every day, but husbands and other male people, adults, have to go. So, in fact, I forgot to say that this book by the Croatian was written also that they, so that the Croats might learn and about Islam and that they develop mutual trust. People of both. Yes. Now, Bath was very important Croatian of Catholic faith used to bath all these communal baths. This is a picture, a bath of Ilica from Banja Luka, that's now part of the Serbian territory. And explanations for the Croats are given how Muslims have to wash before attending prayers in mosques. Catholics prayed at home in those days before the main meal of the day, dinner. Prayer lasted for at least 3/4 of an hour, up to an hour. And in Croatian, the expression that's used for Muslim prayer is not praying, but bowing and kneeling, okay, because of the movements of the body. Some nice pictures. This one should be explained a little bit more. There's a lot of explanation in the book given about Hajj. That's pilgrimage to Mecca. All people who of Muslim faith who can afford are supposed to go to Mecca, pilgrimage once in their lifetime. And this was very important in Asia, in every village. Well, a person would leave, would be accompanied by children, adults, okay? But even from the early time on, from the early childhood, children had to learn about this. There was also a different, you see, women of Islamic faith, they were supposed to be covered. And this also resulted in some other differences with meals, okay? They were supposed to even locations in the same house. You might have noticed that a couple of years ago when I was in the United Arab Emirates, a colleague of I were not allowed. So the means of transport. Now, just to sum up, it's important that all these orders, both of them want to emphasize things, and it was very early, more than 110 years ago, and they avoided all bad things of the past, conflicts, and well, the intention was really generous and good. I think that's all. Thank you for your attention. Running out of
Thank you for your presentation. We hope for some questions for those two doctors. We hope that you will have a discussion about such differences.
So the three of us come from the Faculty of Teacher Education in Zagreb, University of Zagreb, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina is neighboring country. Okay.
So thank you very much for your sharing of your research insights. And Regina is ready with certificates. So thank you very much. And now we are preparing for the next presentation. We will have our colleague, Dr. Reda Šatūnienė from Lithuania, and she will give her speech now. Thank you.
Hello. Okay, so my name is Reda, and I am a ethnologist, and I will present to you about medicine, Lithuania. It's a theme that I am researching not very long, about how difficult and complex, how very uh, complex this theme is. I started this research in 2015 very slowly, then I started to make research more intensively. And today, as we are all from all very different disciplines, so I decided to make a retrospective view about how alternative medicine should be understood, how it is understood, how it is researched from the focus of different, from medical humanities in general, because medical anthropology is research from anthropologists, ethnologists, and any historian who wants. Slide. So why I started this research is because in Lithuania I found that the research is still very fragmentary, especially about speaking about alternative medicine from the current day. Because usually when people research alternative medicine, they say they are researching usually traditional medicine or some new formation or new healing that are very difficult to describe even as healing, and they are very difficult to state something very concretely. So they are researched mostly from new religious movements. So I saw this seems like depending to a specific region, in Lithuania with the socio-cultural and historical peculiarities. And that's why I decided to speak about medical humanities in general. And why I chosen this theme, because I saw that the alternative healing methods are very actual in current days. And as you will see another slide, the demand is growing. So I raised the question as a patient and why people are so interested in those not conventional techniques. More about it, but not conventional. Why are they looking for searching for health in different places instead of going just to medical doctor? Medicine and work, wonderful, and we even have a movement in the actual day. But I think I won't develop this thing because that opposing different approaches to health and healing. So I tried to look more deeper at the theme. There in the picture, there are people who are writing books about alternative medicine, and even some really also medical doctors are interested in this theme. So, as I look at the first part, as I have time to look because it's really a quite even very complex topic for one person. But there was research made, for example, in USA that yeah, like one of the Americans is some form of alternative medicine. Or it is research that people can at first try some non-conventional methods for healing. And then only later they go to a physician. And the researcher, Ross, her name, she's in India, also said that in post-communist countries like Lithuania, let's say, the traditional practices and beliefs like old medicine were never fully extinguished. And this also happened, but not only in post-communist countries. Like I should add about the America, for example, it's a very multinational country, and China, for example, have their own traditional medicine, like medicine, also has a tradition. That's why it's so difficult to describe and to say alternative medicine, because alternative is all and like anything and not. I you try to. So I tried to look at the document and read a whole documentation have a strategy on traditional and complementary medicine. For example, in Lithuania, we say they say traditional and complementary medicine. They do not use the term alternative or non-traditional, as we see, especially from empirical research. I saw that people really understand very differently. So basically, why it is popular, for example, because at some countries, those traditional medicines are affordable for people. So maybe USA, for example. And in some countries, those traditions are vivid because of cultural and historical influence, like Singapore, Korea, China, not in China. And they say that in well-developed countries, that is also like American and many European countries, the demand on traditional and complementary medicine is growing. So it's found it interesting as well. I have a data that is growing. I see that it's did it. Especially when I started research, you find many people who have their reasons why they began being interested. And the World Health Organization says that why it's important to start with traditional and complementary medicine because they are interested why people are using those some specific forms, what forms they are using of healing. The most popular or important form, whether the use follows advice from a health professional, and if health professionals know about patients that they are using, also interesting. Physicians have. And so when we go to about scope of life and medical health anthropology or ethnology or medical humanities, different countries, those traditions or disciplines that are certain the methods of healing, the structures of healing, beliefs in healing differ from country to country. From so I got to want to what is the scope of applied medical or health anthropology, because health anthropology works many places. I would like more about to mention the scope of medical anthropology. So branches: ecological focus, applied focus, ethnomedicine, and they describe the main trends, how researchers, society also look at what kind of growth it is. So ecological focus was written mainly represents that research the based on assumptions that cultures and our adaptation environment. So illness is alerting that above our balance, come wrong with our adaptation, like research or our gift of what illness. But if we define how we define illness or wellness, so this will also influence how we will feel, how we will treat the disease. Another is applied focus. So usually it's called clinical and public. Is at the first case, and in the first case they act like a mediators between health workers and patients. For example, in multicultural context, we are will have a different also cultural value. Or second part, the public applied anthropology is about anthropologists with are solving global health. And ethnomedicine is maybe close to what I found in my research. It says that every society has its own medical system, which includes theories of disease, pathologies. It means the origin of how why methods of diagnostics and healing practice. So in this contemporary movement, not to say not religious movement, that's very popular now. These etiologies that usually logical by theological. So I try to make a research about medical humanities and term in general. So I found that this field of medical humanities represents a very multifocal expression that medical humanities engagement of many disciplines, the medical healing, and it includes also a role of spirituality, of religion in the process of healing, tradition, history, even literature, cinema, how about illness, how right experience. There I could mention one by very well known artist. Shows also how important for people is not only but also somehow to express to them that they should put this experience of illness in their body, environment, of body. So, quite a young branch, like vivid, it's still research fragmentary. I believe that we develop more and more by anthropologists, ethnologists, Here I would like also to mention that about the origin of medical anthropology, because we will see later. Now the anthropologists are thinking that medical anthropology became very biomedicine centric, that biomedicine is taken as a principle one, normal. But they are now predicting, in the second slide I'll show you, because if we should look not from the point of not to be so ethnocentric, but to take all different healing systems like equally. I think it's very difficult, but the recent article I've read by American anthropologists is about this. But interesting to know that first medical anthropologists, or like we say synonym also ethnologists of medicine, were actually medical doctors who were interested not only in healing physical body, but they were also looking for a more creative, different method. And also a little bit further, from my research, it showed that even contemporary medical doctors who are interested in alternative, traditional, non-traditional, how we name it, they become interested because they are looking for more methods to help people. So they see the limits of the methods and they want to go very far. So first, the medical anthropologists were medical doctors. This one is from UK. Then we will have another very influential psychiatrist, is Arthur Kleinman, who wrote a lot of. And in Lithuania, as I told, it's quite fragmentary, but mostly focused on ethnology, on ethnological research, on folk medicine. So it's very actual also worldwide. They just made themes of, for example, today there will be an international Congress of Ethnologists and Folklorists, and they are researching as 3 sections will be dedicated only to medical anthropology or medical humanities, let's be more correct. And so all the teams are covered. For example, all those teams are included in the research of understandings of health, of healing, of what is illness, how illness can be experienced, what practices, what therapies now are actual, important, and also about the history of medicine, how one paradigm become more dominant than other one. There's an association of medical humanities, anthropologists, and ethnologists. Interesting fact that even for me it was interesting. I will show you everything I wanted. I will leave interesting fact that interesting fact I thought I would like to mention that, for example, when we for example speak about alternative, like something maybe not serious, but I found that information about one woman who was medical anthropologist, and she made a research on organ transplant surgeries and organ trafficking, and because of her research and her initiative, the how to say, it was a global network of organ dealers was revealed also. A very serious, what to say, action as for anthropologists, really seems to be just not nothing. So, and just like firstly, it were only rumors about the trafficking of organs, and people do not believe that sometimes even rumors have reason. So my research is taking a step. I'm researching, and there is a lot of material to be researched. I'm making a qualitative research, ethnological and graphical, and what is alternative. So and to finish with the terms, alternative is criticized because it's sometimes understood having a little bit negative connotation. Instead, originally it should mean just other or different. And what terms, for example, I found during the research is that people, how do they call this alternative research? not research, but medicine. So orthodox, state, established, official. And when they speak about alternative, they also use even a different name about describing that theory. So this is my, I think, first challenge is maybe to somehow to clarify, maybe in some article or somewhere or in a chapter, the complexity of understandings and definitions. More or less, I have. So the theme is very actual and it needs a lot of research. And I hope I will make some good conclusions for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reda, for your presentation. Please prepare some questions for our presenters at the end of presentations. And let us to finish with the last presentation, which will be given by PhD candidate from Kaunas University of Technology, Domantas Milius. And we hope for interesting scientific discussion at the very end.
Hello, everybody. My name is Domantas and I'm the first year of technology from Kaunas University of Technology. And today my presentation will be about the American approach to the function of music in motion film, collaboration of Bernard Herrmann and Alfred Hitchcock. In the 1940s, the big players in Hollywood film music were largely all European composers who had fled the Nazi occupation. The likes of Erich Korngold, Nicholas Rocha, Franz Waxman, and Max Steiner brought with them the sound and style of romantic opera music. From the lush orchestrations and large Viennese-style orchestras, the use of thematic musical identifiers for characters, places, and moods, commonly known as leitmotif, not to mention the use of melody. The Hollywood sound was born of men. While that style forms the basis of many a film score today, it was the emergence of Bernard Herrmann and his music for Alfred Hitchcock that added an extra and much needed mention to all that would follow. Aside from injecting some of the first strains of Americana into film music, Bernard Herrmann was quite simply able to get under the skin of the film he was scoring. His music relying to the audience's the psychology of the characters and situations, where Korngold and Steiner and other composers were embellishing with fanfares and flourishes, Herrmann was perhaps understating the furtive instrumentation, shorter passages, and a distinct absence of melody. He was a fan of ostinato, a short repeated motif of a note. Herrmann, it was all about light and shade, creating the perfect accompaniment and tone for the picture, and that means using whatever worked best. One was the standard symphony orchestra proper, and in its place an orchestra suited for the score itself. Herrmann felt that as the ensemble would be gathered for what was essentially a one-time only performance, it would be an ensemble of his design, serving only his music and the needs of the film. While this notion can be traced back to his days in radio music, its use in film was more than revolutionary, and his unconventional ensembles will regularly serve him well. While Herrmann's music, his entire artwork, cannot be easily pigeonholed, almost all of his works showed a natural dramatism that flowed along a romantic channel of expression. We can say that Bernard Herrmann is a 20th century American romantic modernist. He tended to excel in music written not so much in a so-called abstract construct like concert works or symphony, but in response to an external stimulus or medium. Herrmann differs somewhat from Max Steiner, Franz Waxman, and other classical Hollywood movie composers in that Herrmann's texture tended to be homophonic, whereas Max Steiner and others often utilized polyphony and counter melody. Clarification, homophonic music is, we can say, a lyrical melody or accentuation with harmonic accompaniment or background, or we can put it differently, just we can say that the melody line accompanied by chord. Moreover, Herrmann's homophonic style tended to utilize a most characteristically sustained chord accompaniment, the standard type of accompaniment. This generally means long, drawn-out, rather slow-moving chords. Herrmann's music also expressed overwhelmingly strong tonal harmony in the standard sense of conventional chords, such as the frequent use of minor-major triads, especially minor, half diminished sevenths, his favorite or most frequent seventh, and so forth. So Herrmann's very strong focus on harmony and chords was applied in a homophonic manner. The harmonic language or tonal context was overwhelmingly tertiary, for example, stacked thirds in nature, whatever as block chords or openly spaced or inverted. Many of the themes in Hitchcock's movies must have greatly appealed to Herrmann's own personality. The complex dichotomies of reality fantasy, attraction repulsion, and obsession detachment were concepts ideally suited to the composer's music. Beginning with the movie The Trouble with Harry in 1959 and ending with a movie Turned Curtain in 1966, the Hitchcock-Herrmann scores are without fail some of the most inventive overused films. Whilst Herrmann's music for Hitchcock, The Trouble with Harry and The Man Who Knew Too Much contains a wealth of rousing and delightful musical ideas, it was his score for Hitchcock's 1958 classic movie Vertigo that would take film music to a new height. Herrmann's opening prelude, accompanied by soul, bass, whirling images, conjures perfectly the spiraling vortex. Scotty, the main character of the movie, lunged as he desperately searches for ways to assuage his guilt-ridden conscience. As in the best film music, Herrmann's suspenseful prelude draws the viewer closer to the celluloid image, telling him, "Keep watching, this is dangerous and serious, something bad is going to happen." Create a feeling of a need. In the opening titles, Herrmann wrote a melody that had no obvious resolution. 20th century audiences used to hearing tonal music, often incorporating major and minor thirds, such as the introduction to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, are likely to be immediately put off balance by Herrmann's habit of using thirds, the parallel series of notes. Thus, the music appears to turn it on itself, resulting in an ease on the part of the Herrmann was used this technique again and again with great success in his film. For instance, in the opening film The Sisters and as an obsessive and repetitive litany throughout movie time. It's a mark of Hitchcock's trust in his composer's abilities that Vertigo contains more music than spoken dialogue. Here was a film where the director's neuroses and sense of drama were matched note by note by his composer's atmospheric music, where the dramatic and melodramatics of the score heightened the sadness and aching nostalgia of Scotty's fractured personality. For 5 minutes in the Amour, where Judy is finally transported into an almost exact replica of Madeline, Hitchcock allowed almost no dialogue, saying to Herrmann, "We'll just have the camera and you." So, as we see a result, the music becomes almost the third character. Herrmann's next score was for the Cary Grant vehicle, a movie North by North, essentially a mistaken identity adventure yarn. Initially set in New York, Herrmann, in typical fashion, chose not to use city music, but instead composed a fandango, a Spanish jazz, which amongst other instruments used tambourines to accompany the action-packed sequence. Starting with a flourish and climaxing in brutal fashion, Herrmann's score makes use of all his trademark techniques, including all snatches of sound over and over, the brash melodies and tumbling tempos combining to hammer the sense to a ghostly mission. However, it was Herrmann's next score for Hitchcock movie Psycho that would help cement both the director and the composer's reputation. The first thing heard in the prelude is an ambiguous minor-major chord, sometimes referred to in the literature as the Hitchcock chord. Certainly does not belong to Hitchcock because he was not a composer, nor it is used solely in this film, but its conspicuous placement at the head of Herrmann's music signals more than just a fanfare. It is an important feature of subsequent musical structure. The Hitchcock chords are followed by a series of driving half-step figures that we can identify as the seminal chords in the music. This figure has been compared to the stabbing of a knife, filled with latent possibilities for musical development. It was paraphrased by John Williams in music for the film Jaws, who was directed by Steven Spielberg. The half-step relation emanating from this figure is both melodically and harmonically important subsequent transformation of the music theme. Psycho was a horror flick, though using monochrome images to reinforce its director's gothic aspiration. Writing on a small budget, Herrmann's score used only a string organ to complement the black and white photography, because the movie was just black and white, in colors of the film with a black and white score, as Herrmann said. As in Vertigo with Psycho, Hitchcock wanted Herrmann to score lengthy dialogue so that the audience was made aware was being led forwards to a dreadful revolution. When Herrmann started writing music for films, he avoided the overly romantic scores of the time, preferring to foster an individual expression that concentrated on atmosphere, sound, and which stimulated the subconscious react to the emotional turmoil of a fictional character. Though one might argue that film music is by definition the music of excessive emotions and that much of it is only successful with the context of the film, truly great film music is that which works a great music in its own right. Herrmann's film music was characterized not by easily remembered melodies or catchy title cuts, but by music that drew the audience closer to the images on screen. Music that, in the composer's own words, can invest the scene with terror, grandeur, or misery, propel narrative swiftly forward, or slow it down. Thank you for your
Thank you so much for your presentation. I hope that nobody will run out of this room because of the movie. Dear colleagues, now we have the time for our discussions, and I would highly ask you to give some questions for our presenters. Is there anybody who are ready with questions? No. So if you will let me, I will start from question to the first presenter. Dear Professor, I have a question. You mentioned that you made this research of Alps and other priest clothes in the ethnographical region of Latviia.
In Catholic churches.
Yes, and what do you think if you would develop your research and would include other regions of Latvia? Would you find other essential differences in this field? What would you hope in a case of development of your research?
I think that I will not find big differences in this material because it's a Catholic church and it's all Latvian. The same influences, yes, I think no. But I start with something, and I start with Latgale, but because in Latgale, the Catholic churches, we have no, we have many churches, Latgale, yes, and the traditions are very strong in Latgale.
So we hope that you will find some partners in Lithuania and will continue
Yes,
some
yes. In the future, I am planning the international expeditions, field works in Latgale and in Latvia and maybe in different countries. Because some years ago in ICOM conference in London, I met the persons from Sweden, Lund University, and from Poland and from Serbia. The ladies also investigate the same subject, and they agree to participate in our field works and change with information because it's very interesting topic.
Thank you, Professor. Is there anybody who would like to ask? Still no. So maybe I can continue with questions because I have many questions for our presenters because those presentations were very exciting, involving us. So professors from Croatia has presented really interesting things about cultural behavior according to the religion. And maybe you could share your insights. What is happening now when we live in the modern world? Is there any, let's say, particular peculiarities of this region families' behavior according to their religion? Or we started to be a global Europe and global world?
Yes, we've been experiencing some differences. First of all, we talked about the size of the family. Muslim families still have large families with many children. Well, the size of Catholic families has been declined. So they are getting smaller and smaller. That's now, you see, Muslims in Bosnia and Herzegovina they are also a nation. Okay, this was granted to them somewhere in the 1960s, and it was also anchored in the 1974 constitution, the former Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Then during that time, they were not that religious, okay, but with all these things that happened to them during 1992 to 1995 war, unfortunately, many of you probably remember the things that happened in Sarajevo, the capital, okay. So many people died and many soldiers came from Islamic countries, you know, so they said, see, these things that happened to you was because you've abandoned your religion. So nowadays, you know, they've been influenced also by some other, can't say denominations, but branches of Islam, okay, that would be seen as fundamentalistic in the eyes of the world, people from Western civilization. Okay, that's something. So even the appearance of the people might be different in some villages. Okay? Now you'll see young people when they are getting married, where no alcoholic beverages are drunk now during wedding ceremonies, whereas the parents drank alcohol, or they change eating habits. Okay, they are strict about not pork. You know, don't know if you are satisfied with the answer or not.
I would like to clarify something about the name of that nation. Muslims. It used to be both a religious mark and national mark. In 1960s, they were people of Muslim religion. When they were granted their nationality, they were simply called Muslims. So to be a Muslim did not necessarily in socialist times mean that they were religious Muslim people. Okay, so they were a nation called Muslims. Now when Yugoslavia broke apart, they decided that it was pointless to be called Muslims, and they changed their name into Bosniaks, Bošnjaci, Bosniaks. This was as they were called in the Austro-Hungarian times, Bosniaken in German. Okay. Now a few years later, they decided that that name was not appropriate again, and then they made another change, and now they are called Bosnians. Okay, so like people living in Bosnia. Now this name now makes Croats and Serbs a bit angry because they also live in Bosnia. So if you say Bosnian, it could be anyone living in Bosnia. So former Muslims or Bosniaks, also Croatians and Serbian, and everybody else who is not, who does not belong to those three peoples. So there is a problem with this name going on since 1960s, and well, I just wanted to clarify this. And there is no, if you say Herzegovinian, because we have Bosnia and Herzegovina, Herzegovinians, when you say that, that usually means Croatians, but in the east you have Serbs, so Herzegovinians could be Croatians or Serbs, but there are also some Muslims who live there, so they could be all three of them. So this is a little bit of a mix, and when you say the name of this region, you can never be sure who you are talking about.
Well, who should start? Again, they are getting large and large, but parts of it Oh, well, we can say that they might be even artificial, okay? As with all these loan words, so Muslims tend to use more and more words of Turkish origin. And, you know, as we've heard from Krunoslav, it isn't fair to use this term Bosnians, okay? Because it can be misleading, okay? You can't say all people are now belonging to this nation. Is the same with the Bosnian language, okay? So, while Croats, so Catholics from Bosnia, use a variety of language that would be almost the same as the one in the Republic of Croatia. Serbs call that language Serbian, but it's different from the Ikavian variety of the former Serbo-Croatian language, okay, from Serbia. So it can be complicated, okay, with all the norms that have to be observed. But a good thing is that everybody can understand everybody, okay? So it's not that a Muslim from Bosnia can't understand an Orthodox Bosnian or Croatian Bosnian. So, but again, you can't make one variety of a language and say everybody else should stick to it and accept it as the only valid form.
I will just give you an example of one word for coffee. So in Croatian it would be kava, in Serbian it would be kafa, and in Bosnian in Muslim Bosnian it used to be kafa, but then they wanted to change the language artificially, so they started adding the letter H, into words, and then they started saying kahva. So everybody knows what that means, of course, everybody understands that, but you know, this is just one example of little difference. But 99% of the vocabulary is about the same. So you have this maybe 1 or 2% of, there are some grammatical differences, and if you are from Croatia, you can tell who is from Bosnia, who is from Serbia, who is from Montenegro. Okay, so there is no mistaking. There are differences in intonation, so on.
Okay, but there are some problems with young people. For example, a colleague of mine has a student who's starting to become a mechanical engineer, and she learned about books from the Serbian part of Bosnia and Herzegovina, although they were written even in the Latin alphabet. Okay, she wasn't able to use them properly and to learn as she was supposed to learn. Okay, because of some technical expressions. Okay, so although it can be easy for people to communicate on a daily basis with expressions from everyday life, it might be difficult. Okay, that's about all.
And we have a question. Wait a minute, because we are recorded and broadcasted so that everybody could hear you.
I have two questions, and the first one is regarding the age of marriage, because you talked quite a lot about the marriage, and can we see a difference between the age of marriage at the beginning of the 20th century between the Catholics and Muslims? And the second question is both regarding these times and today. What about the interfaith marriages?
was it very uncommon to marriage for representatives of Catholic and Muslim faith?
So the time period that the authors of these two books were dealing with, 1908 and earlier, so the books were published in 1908. In those days, girls belonging to both religions were allowed to get married very early. So it was common even for Catholics to get married when girls were 16, okay? Then it has changed with the law that has been forbidden for quite a while now. Interfaith marriages were much more, the period when they were very common was in the 1960s and 70s, but with the war, as far as I know, it has changed again. Okay, so fewer and fewer intermarriages have been recorded since the 1994. Satisfied?
Yes, thank you.
If I may ask the reader, okay, if there's nobody from the audience, okay, what could you tell us about the percentage of medical doctors when they are seriously ill? How many of them turn to all these healers and alternative medicines? You know, I know just one incident from Germany, a couple of medical doctors, okay, and wow, their daughter almost died, okay. As far as I know, she's okay now, but at one point, okay, they turned to all these things and they, I don't know the amount of money they spent on it, but it was not a small figure. As far as I know, but probably it was, you never know because they use both alternative medicine and so, you know, so you don't know what the daughter was cured. Well, you know what she was cured from, the name of the disease, but what was it? Don't know.
Thank you for the question. Very good question. And of course, I won't tell you the percentage of especially so particularly that of some, but it's interesting. It's a good question, and I think it doesn't matter. Are you a medical doctor? Maybe that when someone from your family gets very sick, and the traditional or conventional common methods that it help, people try to look for the health anywhere. And for me, it's difficult. I have to resist to summarize my empirical data because they have. I'm collecting the interviews. Some of them I'm transcribing, but they haven't coded and they haven't analyzed. I didn't make this part. So my answer is just maybe also will be connected maybe with my experience as well. I think when people meet a challenge like nothing helps for your health, you can't find an answers. So you are going to look for it everywhere because when concerns your health, or especially when children get sick and or people do not want to use a really strong medical drugs, they do not want very serious interventions, they are trying to look for. And I think maybe this is a start where people are trying to look for help. And so it doesn't depend even on the profession. But as I told you before, it should be maybe more painful for someone who is a doctor and you see that you have help. I have heard one story like this, but I don't know. It's just so. Well, maybe that would be all. What can I say? Let's be healthy.
Thank you. Is there anybody who would like to ask more questions? So maybe the question for the last presenter. As Domantas has mentioned, he's PhD candidate, so it's very beginning of your research. What kind of directions of your future research you see? Are you going to continue such an interesting collaboration between Bernard Herrmann and Alfred Hitchcock in his movies, or you will add something more?
Well, my the main research field is about Lithuanian film music because nobody in the whole history of Lithuanian music doesn't wasn't interested in that subject about Lithuanian film music, and of course Alfred Hitchcock and his film music, and especially Bernard Herrmann, is my own favorite film director and film music because that one fact that about 6 decades from 1950s to this day in English language spoken world, the best movie was called Citizen Kane, and that movie's music was composed by Bernard Herrmann. And now, about from 2012, maybe, people from cinematic world decided that now the best music, the best movie is Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, and that movie's music also is composed by Bernard Herrmann. So I think that essentially in a movie, music makes a very big difference, and I can say that movie without music is like a human without soul, because music is very interactive thing in all arts, and it's very emotional. So you can talk about movie as an art form. Maybe I think for me most of it. Of course, that's my opinion because I'm a professional musician again. So it's my own right about all art form. Maybe, for example, actors say that the great movie is all about acting, and the directors say great movie is about directing, light, and other elements. Because like classical opera from and drama from now the movie is an art form who combines a lot of other art forms.
Thank you so much. We wish you good luck in your future research because the idea about Lithuanian movies is a very good one. So there is a question, please.
Smaller parts of notes used in cinema music, for example, quarter tones, and do they have some effect for people's brain?
You're talking about notes.
You used normal notation system where halves of tones are the smallest. The smallest parts we are talking about, but maybe small in music it's possible to use smaller
cues.
Yes.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question very well, but I think that
for example, quarters or of tones, ketvirtadalius, tonų ketvirtadalius ar naudoja?
Yes. In classical movies or in classical music, a quarter tone is just in Indian music and Arabic world more, but in classical music, it's a very good question because I just remembered that a quarter tones is used by Bernard Herrmann in a movie when the Earth stood still, and it is a movie where first time in movie history was used an electronic instrument called that instrument theremin. because the Russian scientists invented that, but we're asking about using quarter tones. And for example, film music, you don't find any music who's in a quarter tone because it's not a classical tradition. So I don't know if I answered your question because I
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. And is there anybody to ask more? If no, we would like to say thanks for all presenters. As you understood, everybody was so interested in your presentations. So it's very important for us to hear what you found out already, and we wish all the best in your future researches, and we hope that you will come back after 1 year or 2 years to repeat your presentations with additional data. And at the same time, we would like to thank to everybody who were participating in this conference online via Researchers Excellence Network. So now we would like to ask for Regina. Maybe you will tell some summarizing word and maybe we'll give some organizational information, just closing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, all listeners and all presenters for this productively work, and it's lunchtime.
So this is the lunch time, but it's not provided by organizers, but you can feel free to go outside the city or to spend some time in the library cafe downstairs, and we will see you in working shops 1:30. So thank you again, and we hope to see you in working sessions.